I was 10 years old. The phone rang. Now, this was almost 30 years ago. And the thing we tend to forget in our smartphone-connected world was there was only one or two phones in the whole house. You see, when I was a kid, everyone took notice when the phone rang. And this call was like none we had ever received. Something was wrong. Very wrong. What's worse is when you're 10 and something's wrong, the adults start whispering. Your interest grows, but they're hiding the truth. Hiding to protect you from the fact that there is evil in this world, and it came and took something from us. That call was about my grandmother. Well, my step-grandmother, but the only grandmother I ever knew. She was dead. And not just dead, but murdered. It would take me 27 years to finally get up the courage to ask all the questions about that night that changed us all forever. And not just ask, but to really go search for the answers. And that's what this podcast is about. To learn more about my grandmother. And with your help and a little luck, maybe we find justice.
Double homicide. Thanks for joining us. I'm Catherine Kriegler and Miss Betty Jones were brutally murdered inside Kriegler's home on Labor Day 1990.
Were murdered on September 3rd, 1990. Their killer has never been found.
5 years ago, two women were murdered in Starkville, and their killer has never been caught.
In partnership with Swell Story Media, this is Knock Knock, the unsolved murders of Betty Jones and Catherine Kriegler. My name is Jason B. Jones.
Starkville Daily News, September 7th, 1990. Starkville police Thursday released a composite drawing of the man believed to be responsible for the murder of a local woman on Labor Day. Betty Jones, 65, was killed September 3rd during an apparent robbery attempt at a friend's home. Her friend, an 81-year-old woman, survived the attack, has been providing police with details of the attack, and assisted in the drawing of the composite. Officials will distribute the drawing throughout the area and the state. The reward announced Thursday will be given to whoever provides the department with information that leads to the arrest and conviction of the person who killed Betty Jones.
We lived just outside of Houston, Texas, in a town called Richmond. We had a small home on a cul-de-sac across the field from Heritage Oaks Baptist Church, where our family faithfully attended and served. My dad was a picture framer by day and a starving artist, as he liked to put it, by night. I would often find him listening to classical radio in the garage, splattered in paint, staring at his most recent masterpiece. My mom, for the most part, stayed at home with my 3-year-old brother and me, unless she was helping with the Mother's Day Out program at our church or volunteering at the local thrift shop. A summer full of bike rides and snow cones had come to a close, and I was 2 weeks into my 5th grade year at Calvary Episcopal School. Our family had just enjoyed the holiday weekend, including a fun Labor Day in Houston, eating and playing with Mimi and Peepaw, my mom's parents. I don't remember much about that day or the ride home, except that it was a day filled with family and laughter. That is, until around 10 p.m., when my mom got a call from my Aunt Vera. I will never forget that night, because September 3rd, 1990, was the night that I was introduced to evil.
I was in the kitchen at our home. We were living in Richmond, Texas at the time.
That's my mom, Colleen Jones. She's Betty Jones's daughter-in-law.
And I got a call from my sister-in-law, who was living in Conroe. And the first thing she said was, "Are you sitting down?"
Roger's wife called us, Vera.
That's my dad, Bill Jones. He was Betty's stepson.
And told us that she had been murdered. And so then we got in the car and came there. But it was just, a blur after that.
It's probably around 9:30, 10 o'clock that night. I can't remember exactly. I think it might have been 10 or a little bit after, but...
That's Steve Davis. He was one of Betty's pastors and a good friend of my dad.
All of a sudden, I got a call from Ridge Parsons, who was the senior minister, who was up at the hospital with Catherine, and he told me what happened. And I said I was going to put my clothes back on and go up to the house. And I immediately left and went up to the house and talked to the police and the coroner and everybody who was up there. But I did not go into the house itself. Betty was still in there at that time. They had not removed her, and the coroner was just finishing up when I got there. So I got there probably within an hour after the event took place, but I had seen her at 5 o'clock that same day right before the event took place.
I mean, here again, I don't know. I know that he got there about a little bit after the police got there. The police had already secured the house, and then he got there and went in. I think he saw it all. I can't imagine it, but I don't know for sure when he showed up, if they had removed the bodies or whatever, but I know he was there on the scene after the crime.
I'm not sure if I asked her at the time or even afterwards how she found out, but I'm thinking that someone from Starkville, obviously, called her. I don't know if it was a family member or just what. As I said before, this is in the days before computers, cell phones. If anybody had anything high-tech, it was a pager. So after I got off the phone with Vera, we immediately started trying to call people in Starkville, and there was a lot of busy signals. I'm not sure everybody had call waiting at that time like everybody has now, and it was hours it seemed before we got any real accurate information about what happened. And finally your father said, well, let's just go. Let's just pack up and get over there, and then we can figure out what to do, because we just couldn't get as much information as we needed or wanted by telephone that night or even the next day.
I imagine that's a phone call that will be sort of etched in your brain. Do you remember how she rolled that out? How she rolled that out to you?
She didn't seem like herself. She also seemed in shock and didn't have a great deal of detail. And I think the way she said it was, Betty has been killed. And of course, I immediately thought she's been in a car accident, because Betty took car trips on her own, like going to Carolina or going to Louisiana. And I don't think I had all the details of the gruesomeness of the actual murder until we got there.
I heard that Betty was helping this lady who had amputee of her leg or legs, and Betty was there to help her recover from her operation. And they were watching TV, and there was a knock at the door, and Betty went to the door and opened it up, and this man burst in, attacked her, and Betty was trying to keep him away from her friend, and he killed her, Betty, and then got to her friend and for some reason left before he killed her. And then her friend called the police, and the police showed up. That's what I remember.
I remember the coroner and the sheriff was there too, and some others, the police. That they said it was one of the worst crime scenes some of them had ever seen, and it was. And I think one of the words they used was horrific. And they had told me how that this person, whoever had done it, had really, been very brutal against her in every way you could be brutal, and had cut her throat, and that she had been and that she had struggled.
She immediately heard Betty screaming.
That's Juki Krigler Holt. She's Catherine's granddaughter.
And she was screaming, "Catherine, Catherine, Catherine." And then she didn't hear anything else.
I don't know in those days how word spread through Starkville in a police investigation where the police or ambulances or the fire department or I don't know what the protocol was back then, but yes, somehow Steve was notified and was actually on scene that very night of September the 3rd.
I was in shock. I didn't believe it at first. And we had to figure out how we were going to get to Starkville and what kind of car we would have to have, because ours weren't roadworthy. Then we had to start figuring out how we were going to get to Starkville and find out how to get everybody situated. So we had to figure out the cars we had to get, transportation, what we had to do with you and your brother, and it was just a stressful time, and I just couldn't grasp it right now, but we had to go into motion and try to get there for the funeral and figure out where we were going to stay and all that. So Mom had to call and find out more about the details.
Everyone, with the possible exception of Simon, had some place that they were expected to be the next day. So all of this had to be arranged for quick time. In hindsight, I'm sure I just went into a robotic mode of trying to get things done because the clock was ticking.
Early the next morning, Mom drove to my school to retrieve my books and collecting the upcoming assignments. She had no idea how long we were going to be gone and didn't want me to get behind so early in the school year. Mimi had offered us her baby blue 1975 Lincoln Continental for the 12-hour drive from Houston to Starkville, Mississippi, since our modest family cars didn't have air conditioning. This car only had 2 doors, but it was as long as a van. It was huge. My little brother and I jumped into the enormous back seat, and we all set off to drive through the night. I remember having mixed emotions about the trip. We didn't have a lot of money growing up for vacations, so part of me was excited about taking a road trip with my family, meeting new cousins, and not having to go to school. But I also had this unfamiliar sense of dread, not knowing what we'd find when we got there. We knew so little, and I'm sure my parents were trying to keep any details away from their 3 and 10-year-old sons. But I was headstrong and inquisitive, and my parents reluctantly answered my questions. I was trying to wrap my head around terrible words like rape and murder, and why anyone would want to do those things to anyone, especially my grandmother.
It's my understanding that she opened the door without hesitation. I don't know if this was a solid door or a door with a window, or if there was any way to check to see who was there, or if there was a chain on the door, all the things that I would have done. or Betty would have done at her own home.
And, the first thing that she noticed was there was blood on his hands. And she didn't, at that moment, they didn't talk about Betty or anything. I'm sure she was, in a total loss for words.
I don't know if this person knew there was more than one person in the house. I don't know if he disabled Betty to get to Miss Krigler, who was an easier target. I don't know if Betty died instantly. It's horrific for me to even give many minutes to thinking about it.
The next thing I remember, I was waking up in the backseat of the car. It was the middle of the night, and my dad was outside at a payphone.
The drive was hard. You're tired, but the adrenaline kicks in, and you just have to overcome it like everything else, and you have to just keep going.
Betty Johnson Thrower Jones. Funeral services for Betty Johnson Thrower Jones, 65, will be at 4 p.m. today at First Presbyterian Church with burial in Oddfellow Cemetery. Mrs. Jones died Monday, September 3rd in Starkville. An Oktibbeha County native, she was a homemaker and graduate of Mississippi State University. She was a member of the MSU Alumni Association, the Bulldog Club, Chi Omega Sorority Alumni, and the American Association of Retired Persons. She was secretary of the Oktibbeha County Hospital Auxiliary and served as an MSU baseball mom. She was also a life member of the Junior Auxiliary and held honorary life membership in Presbyterian Women. She had served as deacon and elder of First Presbyterian Church and was secretary for the Committee on Ministry for St. Andrew Presbytery. Survivors include one daughter, Ann Thrower Irby of Mount Pleasant, Texas, 3 sons, John T. Thrower, Roger T. Jones, and William C. Jones, all of Houston, Texas, 2 sisters, Holly Ganaway of Louisville, Kentucky, and Ann McWhorter of Starkville, 2 brothers, Harper Stewart Johnson, Jr. of Omaha, Nebraska, and Smiley Eugene Johnson of Tempe, Arizona, and 6 grandchildren. Memorials may be made to the First Presbyterian Church in Starkville, Palmer Home for Children in Columbus, or French Camp Academy. The Reverend Reginald Parsons and the Reverend Steve Davis will officiate. Welch Funeral Home is in charge of arrangements.
I wish I could say that I remember the funeral and how packed it was, but I don't. Evidently, it was standing room only, and my parents remember the entire Mississippi State baseball team was standing outside. Turns out, there were a lot of people who loved my grandmother as much as I did. All I remember is the graveside service at Oddfellow Cemetery. I don't think I had ever seen my dad cry before, so it was strange to see tears drip from beneath his dark sunglasses. I watched as a box was lowered into the ground. It was a closed casket funeral due to how she was killed, so I never got to see Mama Betty. They told me that she was inside, but I couldn't believe it. I walked back to the black town car that had brought us out to the grave, climbed in, and broke down in childlike sobbing. My dad held my 10-year-old head to his chest, assuring me that everything would be all right, knowing that it never really would be again.
And they ushered us into a parlor-type room, and then we were ushered into the church and sat in the front of the church, and I was totally blown away by how many people were in the church. I had no idea that she had touched that many people in Starkville. There were even people standing outside the church that couldn't get in because of standing room only.
It seemed like we were brought into the sanctuary, to the family pews, and I must have been distracted by my emotions because I don't remember a lot of what was said. I wish I did remember the music, because that would have been important to me. That was something that I shared with Betty. I remember the beautiful flowers. There were yellow roses, which is the state flower of Texas, and that was very meaningful to me. We had always tried to get Betty to move to Texas since all of her children lived there. And I felt honored that they were honoring her in that way. I was just amazed when I walked in with the family to the seats where we sat during the service. I had not seen the church fill up because we were in an anteroom with the pastor, and I was overwhelmed when we walked into the sanctuary and I saw that the entire church, the town, just overwhelmed us with kindness.
I remember calling my granny, and there were sheriffs outside the door of her hospital room, and I don't think I expected when I called to check on her that they were going to put her on the phone with me. And I think she was in shock because she was just talking just so cool, and I really don't know that she knew about Betty at that time. I mean, I know that what she knew was Betty was hurt. That's what she was even telling me.
It's a mystery, and hopefully one day we can find out who it was.
We came home a couple weeks later and didn't really talk about what had happened. It hurt. We were scared. Families went their separate ways, and I had 5th grade to focus on. But the hole remained. She was gone, and she wasn't coming back. That was until 3 years later, on the evening of October 19th, 1993, when John Walsh brought Betty Jones into living rooms on his national crime show, America's Most Wanted. While living in Ethiopia, some friends of mine witnessed firsthand the consequences of extreme poverty. They saw how Ethiopian women, in an effort to provide for themselves and their families, were forced to make unthinkable choices just to survive. These friends realized they wanted to give these women another choice, one that would provide them the opportunity to earn a living. It was from this experience that Fashionable was born. This movement started with a collection of hand-woven scarves, of which my wife has many, and has grown to include handmade leather bags and jewelry, apparel, shoes, and most recently, a premium denim line, lovingly crafted by women who have overcome extraordinary circumstances. We're so honored to partner with Fashionable and offer our listeners 15% off their first order. Go to livefashionable.com and use the discount code KNOCK15 at checkout. Again, visit livefashionable.com today to help bring opportunity and choice to these amazing women.
Good evening from Washington. I'm John Walsh, and this is America's Most Wanted. Tonight's the 3rd game of the World Series.
On the evening of October 19th, 1993, John Walsh brought Betty and Catherine's murders to a national audience as the lead story for his show, America's Most Wanted. At this point, I was in the 8th grade, and I knew this could be a big deal for the case. The killer had not been found, so surely this would be the media attention needed to finally find this guy. We set up our VCR to record and sat around the TV wondering what was about to happen.
He's about 5 foot 10 inches tall. If you have any information which you think might help police, please call us at 1-800-CRIME-93.
Months and months later, when they did the America's Most Wanted and we all were watching that, I think there were no words to describe what it was like to hear my granny's 911 call. We were not expecting that.
It was an abusive, violent, evil act against two very sweet women.
It just seems like it would just be a piece of cake now if they have that evidence to put it in the system, because there's no way that I think anyone could commit such a heinous crime to two elderly, helpless women. And just, and that's what he did, is he came right in, and so she probably tried to put up a fight, and he stabbed her right away in her neck, and that was it.
The best part of the program was seeing the pictures and the actual film footage of Betty. It was like she had magically come back to life. It was wonderful.
There were so many emotions watching that piece. From seeing all of these Major League All-Stars talk about how much my grandmother meant to them, to hearing Miss Krigler's 911 call. It was all so unreal. But just like everything else, both the new composite and the story faded over the years. I continued to grow up, and everyone moved on with their lives. But the fact still remained that Betty and Catherine were killed, and no one knew why. Speaking from experience, when something like this happens in your family, nothing is ever the same.
That's part of the grieving process you go through, anger. You go through it, but you have to get through it. You can't get stuck in that one area. But once you get past it, you have to have, you pray about it, and you let the Lord help you get through it. Starkville was a very peaceful place, and never thought anything would happen criminal-wise. Until after this murder, I started thinking I had to protect my family against whoever. And so I started getting very, very cautious about places and people and things, and knowing that were bad people in the world, that I had to protect them from, if I could.
I'm sure we did a lot more heartfelt talking after we got back home. But I can remember being very sad the very next month during the time of Betty's birthday, and then Thanksgiving came and Christmas came, and all the times that we would have seen her or at least talked to her and written to her, there was just a void.
I saw her in the hospital, and she felt extremely guilty that she was left behind and Betty was killed. And I told her that we didn't have any hard feelings toward her. She felt real guilty, and we told her that it wasn't her fault, and this was just, that, and everybody, we had to tell her, I told her I forgave her, whatever I forgave her for, but it seemed to help her know that everybody had forgiven her for whatever she thought she had done, when she had done anything. But the guilt was really tearing her up, so I try to relieve that. And that's, and then we left, and then later on she passed away.
And, a quarter of a century has passed now. And just talking about it is making me feel sick inside. And all the more helpless. I mean, I felt helpless then, and I really feel helpless now, because there is still no closure. There is still no resolution.
Whoever is responsible for this has most likely shared this with someone,
There's still something to be done, and here's your assignment. And even though another 10 years plus has passed, maybe what we're doing right now is going to usher in the resolve. Wish you were still here. I've needed you. We miss you. Always love you. You're the best. See you soon.
As I got older and the years passed, I always wondered how something so tragic could happen, and in such a small town, yet there was never any resolution. Surely there is someone out there who knows what happened on September 3rd, 1990. I guess I could wait to find out someday, or I could buy a couple of microphones and a recorder and go start talking to people. After the funeral in 1990, my family never went back to Starkville until now. So when all of this happened, my parents, when they were here for 2 weeks, would always look for the copy of the Starkville Daily News to get their news about what had happened in the murder. And there it was, just past it. It's kind of crazy. This is not at all what I expected. I mean, so far, this feels like a really cute town. It almost feels like a national monument to go to the house where she was killed. I've never seen it before. I've only seen it on Google Maps. I grew up thinking this was some place that was kind of full of fear, and it's just a normal town. There it is, man. That was Betty's church right there. That's it. That's the freaking house. The guy that killed my grandmother came in that door right there. Gosh. She was killed there, and her funeral was there. Less than a football field apart. If there's one thing I've learned about Betty through this process, is that her life was dedicated to giving back. I know she would have loved organizations like Thistle Farms. At first glance, Thistle Farms is a world-class provider of natural home and body products. In the summertime, their bug spray is a must. But what is truly amazing about these items are the people who make them. All of Thistle Farms products are lovingly crafted by women, survivors of trafficking, prostitution, and addiction. You see, beneath the surface, what Thistle Farms really is a place that provides safe housing, economic independence, and a strong community of advocates for these women. Take a minute to visit thistlefarms.org and learn more about this amazing organization. And while you're there, use the discount code KNOCK15 for 15% off your first order. That's thistlefarms.org, where love is the most powerful force for change in the world. As the story unfolds, we'll hear from friends and family, the lead investigator, and others close to this case. Just like any journey, I'm not sure where this will lead, but I do know this: you will be coming with me. If I've learned one thing from the dozens of true crime podcasts I've listened to over the years, is that one person can't make this happen alone. It takes a community of web sleuths to help find answers. As a grandson, I'm excited about getting to know my grandmother more. Every story I hear about the way she lived brings her back to life a little for me. And if that's all this is, then I know that'll be enough. But I'm audacious enough to believe that if we all work together and seek the truth, we may discover a way to help find justice for Betty and Catherine. Next time on Knock Knock.
You can't do what this guy did and not do it again. I just don't believe it. I mean, it was so so evil.
Whoever it was, they let him in.
Yeah.
So he came in that door right there, and they say somehow the lady that was in here got the phone and had a long cord on it, so she crawled.
This would have been the bathroom here that the killer would have then had to, based on Shep's account of the killer cleaning himself up, this would have been the bathroom that the killer would have used to wash Betty's blood off his hands. Knock Knock is produced by Chris Cerrone and me. Special thanks to the Knock Knock team, Lacey Urcioli, Rebecca Jones, Jason Adams, Simon Jones, Cole Flynn, Colleen Jones, and Maggie Thomas. To join the Knock Knock community, be sure and connect with me on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Knock Knock Pod. There you can ask questions, leave comments, or just say hi. We've also set up a voicemail at 1-888-57-BETTY. If you have comments or questions, or you'd like to be a part of the show, please call and leave a message. You can also rate and review the show on iTunes, Stitcher, or wherever you download podcasts. Reviews are key to keeping Knock Knock on the charts, where people can find our show. Our outro music was provided by my friend and one of my favorite artists, Matthew Perriman Jones. To listen to more of his music, please visit mpjmusic.com. We'll be back in 2 weeks with our next full episode, and we'll post a quick Q&A episode in between now and then. So make sure you get your questions and comments in soon. Thanks again for subscribing to the Knock Knock Podcast.